Today on The Download, we're exploring the latest visual trends, including AI and human ingenuity. Authenticity beyond looking real. Sports as a canvas for self-expression. And what this means for your visual storytelling. Plus, we'll take your questions live in our Q&A. Now here's your host, Jennifer Kelly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Kelly, Senior Customer Success Manager here at Getty Images, welcoming you to the download presented by Getty Images. Today is Tuesday, July 21st, 2026. It's 11:02 on the East Coast of the USA, and we're coming to you live from locations all across the globe. FIFA's got nothing on us. As always, I want to give a special shout out to all of our current customers and thank you for your business. We truly appreciate it. Don't forget to drop your questions in the Q&A below, and we'll answer them later in our live Q&A session. And yes, this session is being recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to watch it on demand and to share with your friends and colleagues later this week. All right, everybody, the house is kept and the doctor will see you now. Here to dive into some of the creative trends we're tracking for the second half of 2026 is Senior Vice President of Creative, Dr. Rebecca Swift. Welcome, Rebecca. What have you got for us today?
Thanks, Jen. It's nice to see you again. Well, yeah, I mean, we met and we spoke at the beginning of the year, which feels like it was about 3 years ago at this point. And I've brought the same group of people together to join me to talk about the trends that we're seeing here at Getty Images. So I'll start by just introducing my fellow panelists. I have Tristan, who is head of the Insights and curation team here in EMEA, and Beth, who is the head of curation in EMEA. Jackie, who's head of insights in EMEA, so she's based in Europe, and Rebecca, or Bex as we call her, I'm lucky she's got Bex Lewis written on her screen there, who runs curation in EMEA. And then we have Kate, who runs insights in APAC, and Fiona, who is head of our curation team in APAC. So we have all the women here today, and we are going to talk about what we are seeing globally, the trends we're seeing globally, but also, as you can imagine, we have some regional insights which we're going to share with you, and hopefully you'll be able to see how everything fits together. Now, for those of you that are not aware, the Getty Images creative department is comprised of the insights team, who are doing our daily visual research. We also have the curators, who are, and you've met 3 of them today. We also have producers and creative directors, and we invest really heavily each year in image research, whether that's looking at kind of attitudinal or consumer behavior studies, or whether it's actually testing images. We are constantly looking at how our customers and their customers are connecting with visuals in today's market, and therefore how they might connect with visuals in the years to come. So we use a lot of our own internal data, but we also use data from external resources, and we work with agencies, research agencies, to help us really understand how the general public or consumers are also thinking about the content that we are creating and the content that we want to create. So the trends we're going to talk about today are from the beginning of the year that we brought to one of these sessions, and a lot of those are actually continuations of those trends. And I think we want to continue that conversation because they're so dominant in today's conversation. So the first one we're going to dive into is AI. No surprise there. I don't imagine there are many companies around the world who are not thinking about AI. Obviously, we're thinking about AI in terms of how it's visualized. It's still our top searched keyword. If for those of you that were with us at the beginning of the year, that was something that we talked about then, and nothing has changed throughout this year. As you are probably aware, but maybe not, we do not allow any AI content into our collections or onto our site, and we strictly police all of the content that's coming into Getty Images to ensure that we are not serving modified or generated AI content. So when our customers are coming to Getty Images and searching for content, they're not actually looking for content that has been created by AI. They're actually looking for visuals that represent AI and signpost AI usage in their business. And that in itself is really, really interesting. As I say, we'll dig into that. Secondly, we're also going to talk about authenticity. Now, authenticity is a word that I feel like has been around a really long time and has kind of gone through different evolutions as we have talked about it as a kind of commercial visual. And I think the key thing about authenticity is that it is the counter trend. It is the opposite. It is the antithesis of AI generative content. And we know that brands want it. We know that it's not just a reaction to AI generative content, although we are seeing it as a reaction to generative content. We also know that authenticity as a theme, as a style, as an aesthetic, has evolved as audiences have become more fragmented and more difficult to talk to because of where they're showing up and how they're engaging with content. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing there. We're not going to talk broadly like authenticity is a new trend, but actually how that particular style of imagery is evolving and why it is evolving at this period of time. And finally, the Men's World Cup has literally just finished this Sunday, and it has been a wonderful year for sports, and so we're going to talk about sport. And the reason we're talking about sport is not just because we've just had a football World Cup, but actually because the visualization of sport is changing and the visualization of sports fans is changing. And, we have been in this industry for a really long time, working with sports rights holders and athletes themselves. So we wanted to share again some of our insight that has come fresh from the World Cup, but also what we are hearing around sports image usage more broadly. So rather than listening to me continue to blather on, I'm going to get my team to talk, and I'm going to hand over to Tristan first. And I'd like to hear from you, Tristan, in the first instance around how you're seeing visuals changing that talk about AI. So we'll dig into AI first, get that out of the way.
Yes. I mean, what would the conversation be about trends if not starting with AI? Thanks, Rebecca. I think for Amer, what's been really interesting, especially because a lot of the models, these large language models are headquartered here, so it's really setting the tone for the rest of the world, is the shift in conversation around from this kind of big, bold headlines about all the ways that AI is going to transform the world to something a little bit more subtle. And we're moving into functionality over this sort of big spectacle. And you mentioned, Rebecca, those sort of signposts, right? Like those things that signal, not necessarily, it's not necessarily about AI generated content, but what are you actually signaling and visualizing and using to represent AI. And one thing that's been interesting to watch is how a lot of these companies are putting themselves out there. They're doing a lot more brand storytelling. They're doing a lot more big advertising. There was even some swiping at the Super Bowl this year between two of the big players. But what was really interesting, what I was struck by, but one of the Super Bowl ads from OpenAI, for example, was that there was one ad focused on not necessarily the model itself, but actually how the model helps support people in real life. And they used the example or the entry point as a woman who was a second or third generation farmer who was inheriting her farm from her dad. And she had all of these anxieties about what she was going to do and if she was going to be able to, carry on the mantle, if you will. And what you could see is they actually practically went through the day in the life of the farm work. And that work was still real work happening. But what was interesting is in the background was AI, was this model, was this tool that she was using to support her in different ways and make things more efficient, make reporting on their seed and the feed that they were, and their production and their output, a lot easier to see more quickly rather than her crunching those numbers by hand. So it frees up this time to actually do this work. And this is where we're seeing a lot of that storytelling go. The headlines are now about those efficiencies that people are gaining, these big companies and organizations are gaining. And I think that's also really reflective of where consumers want to be. They don't want AI to kind of replace them, obviously, we know that. What they do want AI to do is be a lot more supportive, right? Help them find information more quickly, help them summarize information more quickly, help them connect more deeply with the people, their colleagues and coworkers, or even their family members, because they're spending less time doing work, right? Their work lives become easier. They're getting more information or clarity around instruction. So it's just all of these things that we're seeing that people want. And so what this means for visuals, I think, where we're starting hopefully to see brands move into, is that rise in those sort of practical everyday life storytelling and the functionality and the efficiency that's enabled by AI. So you're thinking, we're thinking rise in manufacturing innovations and farming innovations and other sort of non-white collar work imagery and new sort of scenarios in the workplace. What does it mean when you are spending less time sitting at your desk answering emails and more time actually connecting and collaborating and ideating, or even spending less time in the office and you're out and about in the world? So I'm excited to bring Beth into the conversation, because we've been thinking through some different examples of like what we believe this can look like visually.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Tristan. We looked at a lot of different types of blue collar work, and we landed on this image where we can see is set in a factory. And what I liked about this image is that it's got this slightly wider view, so you really can take in the industrial textures that just fill the frame. We know that access to a factory location is difficult to secure, but Johnny Long of Flyview Productions is the creator of this image, was able to get access through a friend. So the location is property released, and the models in this shoot were the real machinists that work there. The factory is in a small town in Washington State, so this image is included in our rural US collection, which is focused on visuals that authentically repicture life in the rural United States. But here the casting really stood out to me. The person that we see is Latina. It's giving representation to a demographic that we don't often see in manufacturing visuals, despite knowing from visual GPS data that it's a group with high employment in this field. Most notably, it shows that work requires a human to run the machines. It conveys the message that AI isn't replacing humans. It's in the background, like you said, Tristan, allowing us to work more efficiently. We brought a second picture to discuss. And this one, well, I actually just love this picture. In our business, yeah, we see a lot of visuals of people smiling and holding a phone outdoors. But this image by Ivan Pantic, shot in New York City, stood out to me. It's got this poppy yellow background and the unexpected and playful composition. I love the contrast between the blurred movement of the person in the foreground and that quiet, still moment of the woman on her phone. I love the way the shadows take up so much space, demanding attention. They become equal focus to the model. It's lined up as this very singular moment in time that happens once, won't happen again. And it works as an illustration of how AI is seamlessly integrated into our lives. The efficiency of AI, it frees us up from traditional workspace and allows for more free time and enjoyment.
Yeah, and I just want to shout out that we were having a conversation with a large technology company and helping them sort of ideate around what are other ways that you can sort of signal AI, but in ways that feel cool and less sort of technical. Like one thing that we tend to see with brands is that they go really dark and mood, and with the bisexual lighting and everything is kind of that hacker that's in the dark by themselves. And actually what I love about this is, yes, it's incredibly subtle. Yes, it's a woman looking at her phone, but also it's kind of this unique, striking image where you see the technology that's not foregrounded. It's kind of part of that story.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beth.
Yeah.
Jackie, Bex.
Tristan, I think we cut out a little bit, but you're handing over to me, which is great to see what's happening in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And I can certainly confirm that we're seeing very similar patterns here as well. I shared a little bit at the start of the year that it was very much about brands here in our region were downloading visuals that said, look, AI is here, it exists. And it was a lot of those chips, CPU chips on motherboards, which had the lovely neon, colorful lighting. Well, I can confirm that's dying away. We also seen the robotic hand touching the human hand, a la Michelangelo's creation of Adam stereotype. That's still there. It's still persisting, as we can see in customers' downloads. And we're also seeing a little bit of Minority Report style swishing of screens in the air. But things are turning a little bit. So we can see that AI overall is going down across every single country in our region in terms of people looking for visuals to genuinely speak directly to AI. There are bubbling trends around agentic AI and showing LLMs, so large language models, predictive analytics is up. But overall, it's really about brands here are stepping back a little bit, as Tristan kind of alluded to earlier. And it's less about showing the technology and it's more about showing the value and the benefits it's bringing and showing how AI infrastructure is embedded into people, work life, and so on. But interestingly, it seems that the more AI the world we're experiencing, a lot of brands are experimenting with creativity on the need to show how more human we need to see, especially when it comes to the craft around the storytelling. A couple of interesting examples. I'm always asked by customers here, if you're looking for inspiration, I think there's a lot of playfulness that's going on that's really trying to move away from the seamlessness visual language of AI systems and actually much more moving swiftly towards a playfulness on old aesthetics. So if you want to check out their Norwegian Consumer Council, that's the Norwegian government, they brought out a campaign called Inshittification, or Let's Make Things Shitty. I do apologize for the language. But essentially, they're taking a mockumentary style approach similar to The Office that you'll see around the world, but originated here in the UK. And it's very tongue in cheek, but it's talking about that experience I think we can all absolutely find relevant, which is when you sign up to a digital service that's often underpinned by AI support and infrastructure, but you find that the service just keeps declining and declining and rotting. So it's a really good playful way in which they're doing that. Or another brilliant campaign that I really want to point out is the EU Parliament's campaign that's talking about anti-AI copyright theft. Now, this one, it's so lo-fi, it's so simple. It takes a man dressed up in a robot who's walking around an urban environment, who sits under a tree, blissfully listening to a girl playing a guitar, and then he warbles back what he's heard. So he's taken it, or he walks up to another person painting and robs their canvas, or snatches a newspaper out of somebody on the street and scans it. So again, lots more playfulness that are actually very funny and very effective. And the last example I would say is, I know a lot of you listening in, you might have some loyalty membership programs that you're looking to communicate around. Often that can be a tricky space. IKEA Denmark took a really interesting take on this. They really pushed into the nostalgia around early gaming aesthetics. But essentially, they have somebody in an IKEA store, which I think a lot of us will be familiar with. And as they're moving around, they're racking up points, and there's lots of nice CGI, but they start bumping into furniture and they can't move. And I think that's a really nice trend that actually was taken to a really high zenith by Coinbase, which is a brand that's really nudging and leaning into the fact that the financial services world is also becoming very dependent upon new AI infrastructure. And so again, they masterfully and craft-wise recreate the gaming aesthetic to show somebody breaking out of a system. And it's a campaign they showcased during the Oscars this year. But again, what all of these examples are really pointing to is, in an increasingly AI infrastructure world where you might be focusing on visuals to talk about seamless service, it's actually really important to lean in to show visuals that make it tactile, that make it imperfect, and ultimately make it unmistakably human. So on that note, Bex, we're really interested to see from your perspective what this kind of divide between AI and human craft, what you're seeing it means for visuals.
Thanks, Jackie. Just a big shout out to all of those campaigns you mentioned. If you've not seen them, I'd highly recommend checking them out. The overarching theme is AI visuals are now focusing on the value that AI creates. So the era of visual signifiers like the glowing brains or robots or holograms, that more sci-fi kind of aesthetic, that is fading. Instead, the most successful AI visuals increasingly put humans back at the center. So if you look at this image by UK-based creator Jonathan Knowles, it's about the human-tech interaction. It's borrowing from the gaming aesthetic. There is something nostalgic, like heightened and intimate about the visual. It has those layers of textures. But I think, again, like the campaigns, through prioritizing playfulness, humor, and participation, it brings that human warmth to it. A slightly different visual approach, if you wanted to move away from less playful, will be something like this next example. Again, it keeps humans at the center, and the person is not being overshadowed by the technology. Although less playful, it speaks to that human craft by using more in-camera techniques. So rather than CGI or 3D rendering, it looks visuals that feel more. It does feel more handcrafted technique through in-camera. So playing around with something like a long exposure or more traditional creative camera techniques. But for me personally, the key takeaway for choosing visuals to illustrate AI is think technology with personality, not technology with special effects. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kate to hear all about what APAC's doing.
Thank you. So I'll keep my part brief because I actually want to get straight in with Fiona, because I think what's really interesting listening to you, Tristan, and also to you, Jacqueline, then obviously Beth and Bex, is that actually we're seeing a very similar theme in APAC in terms of moving from AI very popular to sort of show it in an abstract way, in that sort of conceptual way. Whereas now what we're starting to see it much more is showing what is AI actually enabling. So what is the impact that it is having, both from large, big business side of business. So like, for example, the manufacturing element that Tristan was talking to the individual. But what I think is really interesting is, as I was looking, Beth and Bex, at the visuals that you were showing, what I think is fascinating is actually how different it does look. So although the story itself in essence is the same, actually visually, what does that look like for the regions, I think is where it starts to get really interesting. So Fiona, I'd love you to go through, because I know we've been discussing this as a topic a lot, simply because AI for us, unlike for you, Jacqueline, it's still growing, and all the related terms that go with it. So Fiona, what does this mean for us for APAC?
Yeah, I think visually we talked a little bit about the bisexual lighting and the neon colors. So I think in APAC, we're really expanding to not just the bisexual lighting, but to include the greens and the oranges and other colors from the rainbow as well, not just bisexuals. But if you think about recent sci-fi movies such as Project Hail Mary and the posters that are there, it's not just the bisexuals, the magentas and the purples that are there, but we are bringing in other colors as well, the greens, the oranges. And Tristan talked about manufacturing and the emphasis in efficiency to enable human ingenuity. And it's very similar here in APAC as well. It's a lot about zooming in to specific minutiae. In the past, when we've seen AI, it's this big, sprawling, abstract ways of like, here's what AI can enable, here's what it can do. And now we're zooming in of here's what the quality control that it can do. So in APAC, it's really about quality control for manufacturing, automation at scale. So a lot about identifying details, flaws in chips, close-ups instead of the sprawling wide views. And I think it's a result of how AI is being viewed differently as well. I think Jackie also talked a little bit about agentic AI. That's something that's super big in APAC. So that has been one of our fastest growing keywords in APAC for the past 6 months. And we're really all familiar with the visual of somebody being busy on their phone or on their laptop, but we are seeing AI a lot more differently. It's not just automating and doing tasks, but it's augmenting thinking. So that can be a live translator, a travel agent. And one thing here in APAC is that we love our digital overlays.
We do.
So, there's so many digital overlays.
Yeah.
And I think that will just continue to evolve to look more modern, like the one we have here. I'm not the only one that talks to AI, and people are using AI for plenty of things, therapists. And with that, that's a wrap on AI. But with all these AI visuals, what does that mean for more human-made visuals? Back to you, Rebecca.
Oh, nice segue, Fiona. Thank you very much. That was very professional. Yeah, let's do something completely different now. So I think, you know, the most interesting thing for us as visual researchers is what is the reaction to AI generative content. And we have, you know, we've been watching this for obviously nearly 3 years now. And it is interesting every day how the perceptions and usage of AI generative content has changed. And to begin with, honestly, I think we expected a decline in authentic imagery just because it's more difficult to create. It takes craft, you know, to use the words that we've heard today. But I think the value actually of authentic, real, verifiable, human-made visuals is now on the rise, and yay to that, we say. We've just got some results back from a new survey that we're going through at the moment, and that survey has found, you know, very recently that consumer attitudes towards authenticity is pretty consistent across all countries and markets. It signals credibility, it's trusted more, it stands out against competitive imagery. But actually, what is it? What is authenticity, and what is authenticity in 2026? I think we'll start with APAC this time. We'll go back around the world the opposite direction for this one. So how do we visually represent something that essentially is incredibly human and one could say also very personal? Kate.
Yeah. I'm just going to do a quick reflection on what we were saying at the beginning of the year around authenticity, where we all agreed that from a global standpoint, it was becoming more personal and individual. And I honestly think that still is the case. But also in many APAC markets, authenticity is often expressed more collectively. So shown through connection to others, through family and that sense of belonging rather than just pure self-expression. But what's also shifting, and Rebecca, to what you were talking about, how we thought perhaps it was going to decrease if you like, the need for more authentic. And again, we're going to unpick a little bit more, what does authenticity mean? But it was in reaction to just the overly polished and artificial, or as our Hong Kong team called it, plastic looking visuals. We're now getting that sort of antidote where people are increasingly wanting much more those human made visuals that center on this genuine human experience. And I think it's that experience is the thing to sort of unpack a little bit more. And just one other piece sort of to add into that, when we've been carrying out a lot of that research around what does authenticity mean, what do brands mean when they ask for authentic content. And I think what's interesting is when we started to analyze the searches that our customers put through on gettyimages.com, but also through the bespoke content creation briefs that, again, we do for brands. What's interesting for Asia Pacific is that brands aren't looking for a single definition of what authenticity means. Instead, what it is, it's building it through different layers and making it very relevant to the audience or the market that they're trying to get into. So what was interesting is first is they know exactly what isn't authentic, which I thought was really, really wonderful. So again, as I say, it's those layers that go with it. But terms around human, real human behavior, for example, or natural environments and real are getting much stronger for us in Asia Pacific. But if I had to sum up just now, what does authenticity mean visually for us in Asia Pacific? It's balancing the familiar with the unexpected. So whether that's through the people, the setting, the visual treatment, or the scenario, the content needs to feel kind of more emotionally relatable and culturally relevant, but with elements that are sort of serendipitous. So almost like that feeling you had to be there in order to have spotted it. But again, it's quite a hard one to kind of describe in words. So I'm going to bring Fiona in, Fiona, to really kind of talk through visually, what do we mean by this idea of it needing to feel familiar, but at the same time, unexpected.
It being the genuine human experience. So we talk about authenticity and the way it comes in various ways, that relatability and feelings rear their heads differently to every individual. So it's about the different layers. It's about the nuance of towing the line between familiarity and also an element of surprise. This visual really speaks to authenticity for me. It's based in Taiwan, and it can showcase how in an ever-evolving city, traditions are still being kept alive. So in cities like Taiwan and Hong Kong, in China and Singapore, we're like, things are moving so fast. We have wonderful infrastructure being built in. We have wonderful roads. We have wonderful buildings, but our traditions still being kept alive. Our buildings still being conserved. So this visual really showcases how, even in the back, when the road is being refurbished and renovations going on, by the way the medicine is brewed, by the way the very photo has been taken, city traditions will always continue to be kept alive. And I don't know, there's a certain feeling in the air that makes us feel really local.
Yeah.
But the definition of what is unexpected as well depends very much on each individual social norms. So this visual during a customer meeting in Japan really stood out for us here in APAC. So the context here is more than 80% of men we've seen them in this familiar businessman trope. When it comes to advertising, we're seeing the men salaryman trope. But yet we know that in Japan, them being a family man, them being a part of a family is a lot more commonplace now. They see it every day. It's part of their day-to-day lives. Dads are an active part of their children's lives, but it's not commonplace in advertising. So this is why this mismatch between this is what's happening now, but yet it's still unfamiliar to us within the realm of advertising speaks to authenticity. So these are just some of the multiple layers here, and that's what I really like about the APAC region. And then next, I would love to hear from Tristan about the Ameris.
Thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I love talking about authenticity. I think that cliches are cliches for a reason, right? Like, because they're so pervasive and they're so important to many people. I think for specifically in Amer, and this is all across the market, is that authenticity is a little bit on notice. I think one of the things that we are seeing when you have audiences that are incredibly sophisticated and they're constantly exposed to incredibly staged or filtered or even AI generated content has become a part of sort of the visual ecosystem. They've developed this sort of radar for things that they feel gauging whether or not something feels authentic. And when we talked about authenticity back in January, one of the things that we brought forward was how specificity matters, and specificity is related to sort of what Kate and Fiona were talking about, those unexpected moments. But specifically for this world, part of the world, one of the interesting things that we're also seeing happening is like culture is just continuing to fragment and reorganize itself and fragment and reorganize itself. And what we're getting at is subculture just becomes culture and looking real is almost like it's not enough anymore. And even earnestness can kind of come off as cringe. Shout out to Gen Z. And so one of the things that we were looking at, especially speaking of generations in our generations research, which I was just talking about last month with Mel on my team, is the ways in which people are embracing more and more is more, right? Maximalism. That authenticity is becoming expressive again. And, self-expression is incredibly important to that authenticity story. So what people want to see is reality in full, messy, emotional, layered, deeply personal. And whereas before what we would see is a lot of brands would tend to gravitate toward imagery that was incredibly stripped back. It was candid, but was incredibly constructed and staged. What we now want is visual abundance. What we want is aesthetic choices. What we want is treating every object, every color, every emotion as another layer of authenticity. And that's what people want. In fact, the majority, truly 99% of Gen Zers in our surveys say that individuality is incredibly important to them. And they equate emotional and visual richness with authenticity. So these are the sort of imagery that people want to see. And I think Beth has some really interesting examples of how that comes through in some of the visuals that we've been thinking about in the market.
Right. Yep. So this clip is by a New York filmmaker, Blake Davis. It's another, I feel like playful's coming up a lot here. It's another more playful moment. The setting is New York City. It is so unapologetically New York too. It's not sanitized at all. But what really drew me to this clip was this sort of wild fisheye aesthetic. We've seen this technique rise in popularity, but I am still very into it. I liked the soft focus and the muted colors. It feels simultaneously nostalgic and contemporary. It feels like a real moment of friendship. They're having this spontaneous fun goofing around, and they are stylish in a way that feels authentic to them. And we brought another example. This second example is from a series about content creators by FG Trade, who are based in Brazil. And it stood out to me as a fresh take on who is typically shown as an expert in their field. It broadens the story around who gets to be an authority and reflects more authentically who we are turning to for information. It recognizes that today, because of platforms such as podcasts and social media, experts are now able to speak directly to their audiences. But what really stood out to me here is the unassuming nature of the models. The emotion feels genuine. The woman who is the main subject, she has a real body. And we see her personal style. It is a bit understated, but you see it. It's her jewelry, it's her tattoos, it's her manicure. She is bringing her authentic self to the workplace.
Yeah, it's those layers. It's those layers. That's what really gets at that authenticity that people want to see. Thanks, Beth. I think we're passing over back to Jackie and Bex.
Great to hear all of that conversation. I think we can lean into a lot of what we're seeing in the region that's connecting Tristan and Beth with your region, as well as Kate and Fiona with yours. I would also say there was a complicated picture across the region here, given how diverse it is. Really, when I think about it, it's interesting when we look at what our customers are asking for. And if we were to simplify it, if we went back 2 years to 2024, they were very much asking for authenticity that was simply about visual realism. So what that really meant was they wanted real people that were quite natural looking and that looked unposed. In 2025, that actually shifted. So again, we were getting briefs in from our customers that was very much looking at emotional truth and really making sure that the image not only looked real, but also felt real. Whereas in 2026, similar to what we're hearing from the other regions, it is really about showing that human lived experience. But there is a difference in our region. So if we think about Europe, and if I look at that data that Rebecca's just spoken about earlier of how consumers are feeling, in France, I can call out that they are very particularly saying that they're finding themselves in a difficult place. They don't trust the images that they see. They find it very difficult to identify AI generated images. But ultimately, they're finding themselves caught between a place of pseudo authenticity, where a lot of brands are leaning into the cues around authenticity, or they're deliberately trying to copy the messy aesthetics of social media feeds, which, if we're honest, can be quite performative. So where do they go? And they don't want to look towards the rapid and sometimes has been described vapid rise of generative AI. So they're looking for a bit more truth to the storytelling. If we, however, move to the Middle East, a lot of the consumer information we're looking at shows that people across the Middle East, especially in United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, feel very comfortable and open to generative AI imagery. They also say that they are experiencing quite a bit of it as they go about their daily lives, which we don't see as strong in the data for Europe. But what is interesting is that for the Middle East, authenticity matters even more than the rest of our region. And so we see that it's very much grounded in local cultural relevance and a kind of sensitive lived experience. So there's really two good brands that are doing it in the region if you're looking for inspiration, which is Birkenstocks, who have done a really lovely, quiet, cinematic Ramadan campaign this year. But again, it's all about putting the product into ongoing cultural conversations. Or there's a really exciting campaign from Kuwait, which is for a homeware brand called Waba. But they're also doing the same thing, but with a very different creative approach. It's all about a sizzling display of seamless match cuts. But again, it's all quite grounded in their Ramadan campaign around a lived experience and an emotional truth. But Bex, really interested to hand over to you and really see what you're seeing across the region when it comes to curation and what types of visuals you think are best speaking to our customers.
Yeah, I think across the EMEA region, simply put, it's about moving beyond real people and showing real lives. So make culture feel lived in, not observed, rather than simply local casting and localization. Authentic realness means showing cultural specificity, everyday rituals, community, a strong sense of belonging. So if we take this image from Spanish creator Abraham Gonzalez Fernandez, it's a perfect example of that lived in feel. It also taps into visual cues around crafted through filmic techniques. It's got that grain quality that we love. But what I think is the most compelling is how this image represents candid real life. The way candid is depicted has evolved over the last 12 months. Previously, candid equaled more simply just unposed. Now, visually, it's more layered. Layered also seems to be a buzzword that we keep repeating along with playful. But some of the candidness is achieved compositionally. We feel like we're at this table. The framing is off center. It's intimate, but the nuances of imperfection that really help encapsulate the authenticity here. So imperfection is kind of becoming premium. It leaning into that tactile, low file, unfinished, imperfect. So whether it's the glare from the flash on the model or the window, textures on the table or marks on the clothing, all these individual elements help that candid quality, but combined with local details of the street, the architecture, the casting choices, it encapsulates that regional crafted authenticity. Now, moving away from regional and dialing up the craft in a more literal sense is this next image. Authenticity lends itself to a multitude of subjects, and as we've seen from Fiona's example, it's not all people-centered visuals, but a way to incorporate people through craft is using mixed media. So whether it's paper collage, screen print, paint, layering, handcrafted and tactile techniques, it visually signals that human craft. And like the previous example, imperfection help gives that credibility. So leaning into the messy, whether that is a composition or whether it's literal brush strokes, the overall takeaway with authenticity is craft is no longer an aesthetic choice, but it is a credible cue. And speaking of credibility, I think it's fair to say that Getty Images have a champion of credibility with our next subject. I'll hand back to Rebecca.
Thanks, Bex. Thank you, Bex. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, it's been a fabulous year for sports so far, and our teams have been capturing the action as it happens. I hope everybody has seen the wonderful imagery that's come out of the World Cup. If you haven't, I thoroughly recommend going to the Getty Images website and looking at the boards of the images that we have edited there. And as a result of our experience of being behind the lens and also behind the scenes at events like the World Cup, we've also seen how the conversation has been shifting around sports visuals. So while we've always created creative and spectacular sporting action imagery, we're now seeing that the expansion of sport visualization means that that has been a shift in how sport is visualized more broadly. So I'm going to go to Jackie first on this one to tell us what you've been seeing.
I think one of the biggest stories that we're really seeing in all the conversations we're having with sports rights holders or corporate brand sponsors, honestly, is really down to the increasing importance of fans and how fans are being visualized. There's certainly an amazing content that's been captured during the World Cup just recently to really show and I think reflect the rise of changing demographics around fandom. So whether it's younger fans, whether it's female fans, whether it's fans from all around the world. What it is really saying is that it's really the culture that's created and it's the fans who make it, and the opportunity for corporate brand sponsors and sports rights holders to kind of like reshape their ROI is tapping into this visual storytelling. So I'm delighted to say, as Rebecca said, we're very experienced in understanding what's happening around the image making around sports, and right back to the 1800s in our archive, I'd recommend that you take an exploration to see how fandom was captured back in the 1890s. But we're also going to be launching a visual insight sports fandom report in a matter of weeks. And we're going to be focusing very specifically on 3 shifts that are shaping fandom today. So we're going to look at always on fandom. It's really putting a pressure on sponsorship now to have a whole visual ecosystem and a content engine, because with AI, and we spoke about this a lot earlier, it's really driving a lot more hyper personalization, getting to fans the visual storytelling they're looking to see as quickly as possible. We're also looking at how sport is becoming increasingly about culture. So again, there's an opportunity for sponsors, but also an expectation that they become cultural architects and not simply show up as logos. So again, you can think about the partnership of LVMH and how they really put their stamp on the visual ecosystem for the Paris Olympics in 2024. And then finally, the third shift really is about women's sport and how through their fight for visibility and growth around the sport, they're actually setting new standards for fandom and new interesting experiences that is actually really quite inspiring. But for us here in our region, just to get a little bit more to that level, in Europe, we really find that the opportunity lies in fandom, it lies in lifestyle, culture, and community around sport, whereas across the Middle East and specifically in the Gulf region, sport is really becoming a powerful expression of kind of national cultural identity and inclusion. But the one thing we can say in our latest data, when we're really trying to understand fans, Fans who are fluid, fans who are passionate and fanatic, and fans who really just want to come and experience the culture and the immersion events around sport. One thing is clear, they want to see real access, they want to see real stories, and they want to see real participation. So not just simply highlights from the game. So to break that down, 40% want to see behind the scenes. They want to see documentaries about the athletes that they love, as well as seeing the game highlights and the key plays. 31% want to see historical visuals of sport and how the sport has evolved. So please do tap into our very rich archive. And then 25% really want to tap into athlete and fan user generated visual storytelling around sports and sports experiences. So it's quite a wide variety and quite a lot of opportunity, but also a challenge when you're thinking about it from a brand perspective to get that visual cohesion. But ultimately, and this is the most important takeaway, how do they want all of this delivered? They want it delivered by video. And it's not just short format video, it's also long format video. But ultimately, the key takeaway is that sports still remains one of the truly authentic content environments. Because when we did our image testing very recently, and we showed our respondent sports imagery that was AI generated, and we told them it was AI generated, the appeal dropped off by 30%. So again, real access, real moments really continue to matter. And then finally, when we think about culture around the sport and you're trying to break it down visually, again, what fans are really looking to see is not just, as we said, the kind of excitement around the act of play, but 8 and 10 are equally interested in the culture around sport, with 55% saying that sports extends into fashion, food, and events, and 50% saying that the surrounding culture is a major reason that they're fans. So, Bex, on that note, what do you feel it really means when it starts to tap into how can we create exciting stories when it comes to showing the changing demographics of fandom, what they expect and how they want to receive it?
I mean, as Rebecca teed at the start, it's hard for me not to speak about football or soccer, depending on your location, as we're coming off the back of the Men's World Cup. But I'm really excited to share some behind the scenes of this exclusive shoot from Simon KR. I have cheated here because one visual recommendation wasn't enough for me. So I've had a video put together that shows the whole scope of the shoot. Shot in Wörthersee Stadium in Austria. There were 600 people included, 350 extras, 250 crew, 15 cameras. Kits were manufactured, signage, everything that's commercially ready content. But I think what's really crucial about this shoot is how it features the fans. So beyond the credible logistics of the production, it's that goes behind a live event. The culture around sport is becoming as valuable as sport itself. Capture participation over spectatorship. The strongest visuals increasingly show fans sharing the sport, shaping sport culture. Fans are rising as co-storytellers. Equally, it's about reflecting a real audience. So a way to connect to your audience that moves things on visually is to show the rise of younger fans, multi-generational communities, and fans from all cultures, especially those driving around women's sport. Through partnering and amplifying the next generation and visual language around fandom, it creates emotive connections between brands and consumers. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kate to hear what's happening in APAC.
Thank you, Bex. Jacqueline was very comprehensive with everything that you shared. So I'm just going to really focus in on one very key point for us in Asia Pacific, and that's simply because it's just grown, I would say, over the years that we've been looking at the visualization of sport fandom in particular and what sort of really stood out. And what I would say, and it's something that you already touched on, Jacqueline, was that for us in Asia Pacific, sport has become very much a way of expressing identity, but again, within a group, particularly if I'm thinking of our Asian markets, it's where they're finding community and it's where they're really able to participate in culture. So although the visuals showing their support of the competition itself, if you think about the visuals that you see in a stadium are remaining very popular story to tell and still a strong one to talk to, particularly if you're thinking about who are the fans that we're trying to show, who are the real fans behind the competition of it all. But I'd say the opportunity for fandom visuals for Asia Pacific is, again, much broader than the game itself. It's about capturing the rituals that people do before perhaps the match itself, or even just simply all year round fandom that they have, the communities that they're part of, the emotions that they're feeling, and the cultural moments that happen around sport for those specific markets. But I think there's no better way of really bringing it to life is by Fiona kind of sharing what do we mean by that when we talk about identity, feeling part of culture, and how in Asia Pacific, Fiona, people find that sense of belonging.
Yeah, I think we've really talked quite a bit about authenticity today, but this talk on sports culture, particularly for APAC, highlights how, depicting realness amongst the different groups requires kind of a particular take. It's not just kind of showcasing perfect moments, but instead of showcasing distinct personalities, it highlights, a particular community these individuals belong to. Throughout the aesthetic of these visuals, I think the interest in younger audiences also very much shines through. So gone are the polished, picture perfect images, but now it's bringing audiences in. It's high flash, it's in the moment, but most importantly is what you just said about culture, identity, and group expression. So going back to really showcasing the particular community these groups of individuals belong to, they all have neutral colors, but you can see they all have their little quirks. Some might carry like a different colored yoga mat, some might have a different headband. So the way I think about it for how we depict authenticity and how we depict community within APAC is this individualism within collectivism. So if you think about High Rocks versus Run Club, versus somebody who does Pilates, that's the difference. To put it in American context, maybe it's like Solid Core versus Barry's Bootcamp versus Soul Cycle. I don't know. Okay, over to the.
I love that reference. Thank you. I now understand, Fiona. Rounding us out with sport, specifically in the Americas, especially since we've just, as everyone has mentioned, celebrated the biggest World Cup across the 3 countries in this part of the world, is, with sports for us, I think the interesting thing is everything that Jackie and Kate and Bex and Fiona, they've all talked about is also true. I think the one nuance is to recognize that it's about sports in first person. So that first person storytelling is incredibly resonant. And it's not just about the fandom, it's also about the athletes themselves. So one of the interesting examples that I want to pull through as a New Yorker by birth, as well as as someone who was here when the Knicks won the championship, historic win, the interesting stories that were coming out. So you had those man on the street interviews, you had people filming on social media, you had people at the parade, but also you had stories about the athletes themselves, their interviews with press, their walking down the tunnel, their partners who are bringing, like Jordan Woods and Karl Anthony Towns, her lucky bag. All of those stories were a part of the conversation about sports. So it really is about that first person storytelling that really is going to resonate. It's not just behind the scenes and documentary about the athleticism. It's about how people are coming together and are moved and connected by sports. Sports is culture, if you will. So with that, I want to bring Beth back in for our final example, which I think is pretty relevant for this moment.
Right. Okay. Is this the softball shot that I'm seeing?
It should be the soccer shot.
We're going to the soccer, right?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Yeah, we're staying on soccer. This visual clip is by Lighthouse Films, and it's shot in Brazil. Why I pulled this is that I just really like how the action is framed up in this narrow alleyway. I love how colorful the setting is. The tracking shot is low angle, so it gives that personal perspective that you were talking about, Tristan. And I actually love the use of slow-mo here and the way the handheld camera follows the ball around from player to player. I like the unfussy styling. Each kid has just a pair of colorful shorts on. Some of them are wearing sandals. Playing soccer is just a part of their everyday. And it shows that those sport moments don't have to be those intense moments of fierce competition. It can just be about the love of the game.
Yeah. First person storytelling, literally, even by the perspective. Thanks, Beth. And over to you, Jen, to wrap us up.
Well, downloaders, we had so much great information in this session that we actually ran out of time for live questions. I see that some of you have submitted questions. Don't worry, anything that we didn't get to, or everything we didn't get to, we'll follow up with you directly via email and answer those questions for you. Thanks again to our amazing panel, Rebecca, Tristan, Kate, Jacqueline, Bex, Fiona, and Beth. As a reminder, you can catch all past episodes of the Download on Demand over on our dedicated show page. If you have any questions about visual GPS, custom content, or any of our products or services, contact your Getty Images representative, that's me, or email us at thedownload@gettyimages.com. For those of you joining us on Zoom, as you exit today's session, you'll be asked to answer a few brief poll questions. Please take a moment and let us know how you liked today's program and what kind of topics you'd like to see us cover on future episodes. And before we go, we'd like to say happy trails to our art director, Emily Lyon, who will be leaving us at the end of the month after 9 years at Getty Images. We wish her the best in her next adventure, and we're all going to miss you. Thank you once again for being a Getty Images customer. We truly, truly appreciate your business. I've been your host, Jennifer Kelly, and we'll see you next time on The Download.